Welcome to the Honest Field Guide podcast, a weekly show dedicated to winning in entrepreneurship. I'm your host, JinJa Birkenbeuel. I'm the CEO of Burt Creative, a leadership, brand strategy, and visual identity agency dedicated to helping scale brands and assist with their adaptability with the market. On my show, you get to eavesdrop in on intimate conversation with business leaders and inspired entrepreneurs, designed to give you tips and strategies so your own business can thrive. Subscribe and join me each week for laughter, inspiration, and honest stories. Welcome back to my show, the Honest Field Guide podcast. I'm JinJa Birkenbeuel, your host, and I am so glad that you are here today. Like I always say this, you could be anywhere in the world, but you're here with me. And for that, I am very, very grateful. If you could please leave a 4-star review on Apple Podcasts, because I think that's the only platform that actually allows you to leave a review. And if you could follow my show and like my show on YouTube, Spotify, iHeart, wherever you listen to podcasts, please check it out, follow, and come back for all the shows I'm going to be having, especially this one. This is a great show. So I always like to start my shows with why I have this person on my show. And I'm not going to tell you who it is yet. You're going to find out when you're listening. But I was in New York a little while ago and I was walking around the city. You know, I was at the Fast Company Innovation Festival, actually, and I was eating pizza and I was eating chocolate from my favorite chocolate shop, by the way, called Stick With Me Sweets. They're in Soho. But anyway, I was drinking hot tea and I was just enjoying myself because New York is one of my favorite places to go in the entire universe. I love that place. It brings me to life. It brings me to life like no other city. And I heard about this talk happening at SK&K, and it was featuring the creative director of Dr. Martens, a brand known to me, by the way, as Doc Martens. Like I mean, for real. So anyway, I decided to attend and, I walked in, covered in my own bias. I wasn't even questioning my expectation of what a creative director looks like at all. Just walking in and, in fact, I just wrote an essay in Campaign USA titled, "Where Are All the Black-Owned Creative Agencies?" So I walked into this beautiful office and everybody was vibing and everyone's having a good time. And it was very diverse and it was just wonderful. And I was pleasantly surprised to see that the creative director of Dr. Martens was indeed Black. I was like, what? Like, what was I thinking? Why did I think that? I mean, there's a lot of reasons I was thinking that, and we can unpack this for days on end. But what really was beautiful about this talk that this person gave, the creative director of Dr. Martens, was he was talking about his vision, his ideas, his plans to innovate and transform. And the brand has always inspired me anyway, right? It's just been amazing. So right now I have this creative director on my show and I'm absolutely in love with him and I'm in love with his vision. Welcome, Darren McKoy, to my show.
Hey Ginger, how are you? Thank you for having me on. Appreciate being here.
I am so happy that you're here. So one of the things that I noticed about you at the talk at SS&K when you were there being featured by their organization to talk about your role and, ideas and vision around Dr. Martens, I noticed that you have like this super bright and positive disposition, right? Like this idea and feeling that anything is possible. Where does your optimism come from?
Oh, what an amazing question. Wow. Well, before we get into that, big shout out to Nadia, Stevie, and Lenny over at SSNK. Thank you for having me on the Innovation Summit and also giving me the opportunity to meet you. But to go back to your question, I think my optimism comes from my upbringing and my parents, my father and my mother, and the general family, the wider family, just in terms of when you come from where I come from, the north of the UK, working class families, you don't have that much. Do you know what I mean? So you err on this kind of place of just thinking about what can come and what can you do, how can you transform, how can you do things different, and it's just something that's been ingrained in me since young. Just an element of just think positive about everything and try to reposition your thoughts and the way that you operate into more of a light-hearted sense of being.
I love that. I really do love that. So upbringing is so important. I feel like, were it not for my mother, and her desire to just let me be who I was, she was a free spirit and she wanted to make sure I was too. So she never stopped me from making art and building things. I'm just curious for you with your parents, and it sounds like you grew up in a two-parent household, possibly.
Yeah.
Okay. So like what were you creating and building as a little boy? So were you in art school? Were you in fashion as a child? How old were you when you started seeing creativity? Or did you feel creative? What was the cultivation process like in your family when you think
Yeah,
back?
it's multidimensional. Look, I grew up, my family of a Jamaican descent, Caribbean descent, and I grew up in the church first and foremost, up until probably the age of 14, 15. My dad was in the British Navy. He was a pianist, very creative, played in bands in the UK through the 80s. Um, my mother worked in a steel factory. Now, we creativity kind of manifested itself in many different ways. There was that element of the music link and the whole thing around kind of music within the church and music within my kind of father's mentality and building and being, which is what he does right now. The other side of it is that creativity also came from sport. So as a child, I was a keen soccer player, as you call in the US, football player, and the lens of creativity and teamwork and being in a space of freedom and creativity through sport was something that kind of got me into this space of where I am now. Now, it's quite interesting to think about that because people think, well, sport and fashion. Well, you think about other big brands in the world. Do you know what I mean? The element of sport, connectivity, team sport, um, that element of passion and product and why you're wearing something and how something is kind of helping you perform and build is kind of the thing that gave me this link into fashion. I love footwear. I love football soccer boots. I love the soccer jerseys and all this kind of stuff. And that was kind of a thing that I was like, oh, that's interesting. What is that? So this element of creativity spawned from an element of music and the people that I was surrounded and style within the church and within the family. But then also the other side of it is this amalgamation of sport.
What did elementary school do for you with your artistic or, your creative, attraction to that? Like, did school have anything to do with it? Because you brought up the church. And when I think of the church in America, especially if I think of, the black church in the United States, it's very conservative and very, it's not, there's not a lot of super fashion. It's just very conservative and very respectful. But what had more of an impact on you, the church, your family, or did you have something happening at elementary school? Because when I was a kid, I was in art classes from when I was like 3 years old.
I think for me, it was definitely the church. Now, the reason why I say that was yes, church is conservative, but music was a way of connecting people, right? And music was something that came from culture. Music comes in most cases from culture and a way of expressing an element of connectivity, right, between areas. I was born in a city that was one of the epicenters of music in the UK outside of London. Sheffield, Manchester, London, you could argue Leeds, where some of the bigger bands came from. And like I said before, my dad was in the church, but also contributing to music. And that's where you see how people are dressing. And you obviously understand from a Caribbean standpoint and from the point of when my parents and their parents came over, there was a lot of the kind of Windrush, ska music, reggae music coming in that was influencing people who use church as an element of expression. Not everyone can be famous and all these kind of different things. So I was in this kind of mix of really interesting community. Now, music and sport were things that were influencing me. School was important in terms of being in a community of people that didn't look like me, and I had to kind of be different and think different. So I've leaned into music probably more so than the actual physical arts. Do you know what I mean? Playing the bass guitar and all these kind of things when I was young, in and around church, and then in and around my friends at home. So creativity came from that, and creativity came from that probably more so than school itself until I got older.
Interesting. So interesting. A lot of people I talk to, school was really this sort of, linchpin for them. So college, did you go to college?
Went to college. Yeah, went to college. I studied what we called media studies, which again was linked into some form of music and communication and all these different things. What we're doing now, right, in terms of like expression of language. So I did that at college. Actually, didn't like it at all because I thought that I wanted to go and work for the BBC and work on TV and work in the music industry in some way, somehow. But it wasn't the thing. It was always that underlayered connection to sport that took me to working in retail while I was at college and university, to selling products to people, to buying products for retail stores, to working with consumers on shop floor. So it's all linked back to kind of my love of products, if that makes sense.
Wow. So you went to college. Did you graduate?
Yeah, graduated from college. Yeah.
And then so you're saying when you were in college, you were working in retail environments in college. And what was your major in college though? Like what did you graduate with?
So there's in the UK you do, let's say, elementary school, and then you do 2 years of what we call college, which I assume is like your higher version
High
of high
school.
school.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, and then you go to university. So after college, doing media and English language and all these kind of things, I decided to go to another city just outside of where I was born from, called Leeds, and actually studied what was called retail marketing management, which was all about how products are created, how stores, retail stores like Macy's or I don't know, Goldman's or whatever, all these different stores, how they work and Neiman
Neiman
Marcus, all these kind of
Marcus.
places.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Oh yeah. So I went to work, went to study how retail is, why people consume, how they consume, digital versus non-digital, all these different things, and get an understanding of how sport, music, and culture and the arts is then manifested into physical products, and then how is product created, and then how product cycles through people buying stuff and consumer behavior and all that kind of stuff. So that's all the stuff that I did in university, in
That's
college.
incredible. So it's so funny. I was saying college and you're thinking high school and I'm thinking college like university. So
Yeah,
now it makes sense to me now.
makes
Like
sense, right?
when I
Yeah,
say
yeah.
college. So you're integrating all of these different things that are interesting to you that were interesting to you when you were a little boy. Did you create that curriculum or was that a curriculum that existed at the university? Because I'm trying to figure out like what is that?
No,
Yeah.
it was the thing. It already existed at the university, right? So it's something that I kind of randomly discovered. Once I was having a conversation with my father about what I wanted to do after finishing school, general school. And he was like, "Look, you love sport. You spend all my money on shoes. You spend all my money on clothing. You spend all my money on soccer boots. You spend all your money on going to nightclubs and all these different things. You clearly love fashion and culture some way, somehow. How do you make it into a job? And you like working in retail and you like serving people. Oh, let's do some research." So we did some research together and we found this course. And I went on the course for 3 years and I never looked back. And that then gave me, let's say, commercial acumen and consumer and retail behavior understandings and big organization thinking in a theoretical aspect with what I've experienced for years of, do you know what I mean, serving and working with people, the 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 human connection between the retail kind of spaces. So it kind of gave me this love of understanding how and why and who, and then you get to this place of, okay, so I've done that. I understand the theory. I understand why why a store is set up a certain way and how you walk in and certain things on the right hand side and left hand side, and why certain things in supermarkets are on the top shelf, not the bottom shelf, and how things are priced and all that good stuff. Um, then I was like, but how do then the products get to the shop? Like who makes, who's that brand? How does Adidas or Nike or all these people, who creates that product? And if you do the due diligence around it, you then realize there's a lot of this link to art and music and culture and sport that spawned a lot of the brands, and then okay, runners, and then it became this thing of an obsession of trying to understand and go on this journey of exploration to find out, okay, how do I get into one of those organizations?
That's incredible. I first of all, I love your father. Shout out to Mr.
Shout out to
McKoy.
Keith, Mr.
Shout out to
McCoy.
Mr. McCoy, man. He's like, I want him to be my dad. Like, I'm like that. That sounds like a conversation that a lot of young people should be having with their parents that really, frankly, don't have. From what I'm reading and understanding from younger people, they're just not getting that kind of guidance. So, man, shout out, Mr.
Yeah,
McCoy.
he's
Um,
still the guy. He's still the guy that I call now if I have issues as an executive in a company. How do I navigate my way through this problem?
oh my
Well, you should
goodness.
do this.
Okay, can I get his number? I need some kind of
Yeah,
help like that
I'll
too.
share it. We'll share
Can
it.
you get me the hookup?
We'll get him on to do a call.
Get me the hookup. So, okay, so you like had lots of epiphanies going on when you were at university. when you graduated, what was your first job?
My first job after graduating was actually working for a small independent, let's say, lifestyle retailer called HIP. They were a
What are
store
they called?
that HIP, HIP, as in hip
Oh,
fashion,
okay.
hip style.
Okay. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
It was run by a black guy and an Italian guy, one guy called Everton Campbell, who at that point was probably one of the foremost leaders in fashion streetwear culture in the UK. Um, music and all that great stuff, big DJ and into the scene and um, all that kind of stuff. And another special person called Umberto Anacini, who was basically an Italian descent, moved to the UK, set up this company in the early 80s with the other individual, and they created this really phenomenal business that was kind of sourcing and bringing in all these really cool brands from the US and Japan and all these other places. So I went to work for them on the shop floor as I was studying, and then I finished studying, and then they were like, "Come and work for us full time on the shop." And I was like, "Okay, I'll work to try and get some money so I could go and to parties and hang out and do, but more importantly, be around the product that I really loved and I was into, and the culture I was into, and the music I was listening to at the time, and the people that I wanted to be around in the city." And so then I worked there for a little bit, and then they had an opening to start doing kind of, let's say, almost like helping them curate the store and make the store look cool and like put new products onto the shop floor and then do some help on the buying side and what they bought and how they bought. So I got a little bit of a kind of hands-on feel on how they were operating and tried to put a little bit of the theory into practice that I'd learned at university.
That sounds incredible. This is a question I was going to ask you later, but I want to ask you now. So what did you see yourself as an artist? Like, what did people like to label, right? How did you label yourself? Because this sounds like you were thrown in willingly and with abandon and vitality to do lots of things. And you were learning so much and you were like, give it all to me. Like, what did you call yourself?
When it comes to anything, the way that I look at my, let's say, evolution in my career, and the look, not the look, but the opportunities that I've just put myself in situations where I had to learn. Do you know what I mean? And around people that are better than me, and around people that know more than me, and be a sponge and absorb and learn and fail. And I think my route to where I am right now has been very unconventional in terms of didn't go to design school, didn't go to art school, um, but I went to the school of the street and went to the school of, do you know what I mean? Working and building a muscle and a strength in different ways commercially to then move it into creativity. Do you know what I mean? Because it's for me, and I've said this before in another interview, I think to be a good creative lead or a good art lead or be a good, just a general good operator, you have to have a good understanding of all things. Do you know what I mean? In my space, you can't be creative without being commercial and you can't be commercial without having a creative way of operating and thinking. Do you know what I mean? And a lot of things that we do in life are about design thinking. Even though you're not a quintessential designer, you might have an issue with your life. You think of a way through that system. Do you know what I mean? That problem. You design think your way through. And for me, having that mentality makes me more of a creative individual. And I find a way of operating in that way. So am I an artist? Yes, in some form, but I'm a creative thinker, probably more so than anything.
I love that. I wrote an essay in Fast Company magazine about redefining creativity and who is creative and who gets to be creative. I'll share it with you, but if you look up JinJa Birkenbeuel for my listeners and type in Fast Company magazine, you'll find this essay, and it's actually resonated with a lot of people like you and I that inherently we are artists, but our go-to really is that we're critical and creative thinkers. I mean, because we're able to see multiple things at multiple times and come up with multiple solutions and multiple paths. And it's, I mean, people like us, I'm not trying to be like, I'm not trying to be arrogant, but we're not like everybody else. I mean, we're not better. I'm just saying we're different. And I think having people like us on teams, whether we're leading or, in collaborative environments, really you have to have a thinker like us there. And it's even better if you have more than one. Right. But I want to understand.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I want to understand. So did you I remember when I was interviewing Ray Chu a couple weeks ago, and he was a prodigy at 6 years old, and he's he's now the musical director of Disney's Dancing with the Stars, but he's like a giant in the United States for music direction. Were you okay? So you, to me, sound like from a very young age, you kind of were like that. Like you had this, you were very different, right? And so you've been able to craft this career with all different and going in all different types of paths and different directions and learning everything, without spending a ton of time on how many places did you go before you hit Dr. Martens? Because I feel like you did a lot of things before you got there. Maybe not. How did you get to Dr. Martens? Because it's a beautiful brand. It's a brand that I've loved my whole life. And I've just, by the way, for those of you that can see on the show, listen, these are my new Doc Martens. I should say Dr. Martens. And I want to ask you about that too. Like, I grew up with Doc Martens. I did not grow up saying Dr. Martens. Like, I'm like,
Yeah.
I didn't know it was, I actually did not know it was Dr. Martens until I showed up at your talk. And I thought,
No
wait a
way.
minute, what? It's Dr. Martens. Like,
Yeah,
what?
Dr. Martens.
I
Yeah,
didn't,
yeah.
I
Two
thought it
doc
was,
It was founded by two doctors in Germany and
yeah.
a creative from the UK called the Griggs.
Yeah. I mean,
So yeah.
I did not, I've been calling it Doc Martens forever. Everyone in my world is Doc Martens. Even the guy at my
Interesting.
Audi dealer was like, I have 4 pair of Doc Martens and my brother has 14 pair of Doc Martens. So I want you to help me understand how you make that differentiation. But can you please, tell me, how did you get to Dr. Martens?
My my route to Dr. Martens was very diverse. I've had the pleasure of working in 4 different countries. Um, so I left the UK. I went to live in Germany. I worked for Adidas in Germany for 4 years. Then I moved to work in Switzerland and Italy for the North Face. I don't know if you know the North Face, the outdoor company,
Of course,
makes
absolutely.
jackets.
I
I
have
did
one.
that for two. Yeah, I did that for 2 years, 2 years. Then I went to live in Amsterdam to work for Asics, the running brand, and another brand called Onitsuka Tiger, which is a Japanese organization. So I was traveling between Japan and Amsterdam for best part of 4 years. And then I returned to the UK to work for Dr. Martens. Now, my return to the UK was based on me working with an amazing black leader who was my boss at Asics. He hired me to Asics. And then I worked with him for 4 years. We were quite successful at Asics. And then he left to go to Dr. Martens and asked me to come and join him on the journey with Dr. Martens 10 years ago. And then we've worked together and built up. And then he left the business and I continued on after him.
That's so wild because you're saying Asics and Adidas. I mean, these are all magnificent brands. And one of my questions was, and I'm just going to ask you now, when it comes to Dr. Martens, do I have to say Dr. Martens?
You say what you say,
I
Docs.
want,
You say
I,
Dr. Martens. You
I
say
feel
Doc. You say
like
whatever.
I'm struggling. Like I keep in my head, I'm saying Doc Martens, but I have to get doctor out of my mouth. Okay. So anyway,
You say Doc Martens. Go on. You say Doc Martens.
I feel bad about this though, because you're representing the
No,
brand.
it's
So
fine.
I gotta
It's
be
fine.
right. I gotta be right.
It's fine.
Okay. Dr. Martens. So, I was talking when I was taking my car in, it was so funny because, the guy I was talking to, I just randomly mentioned I was having a conversation with the creative director of Dr. Martens, and he transformed into a human being at that moment. He was no longer working at the dealer. He was like, "Oh my God,
No
what?
way.
I have 4 pairs." And
Oh, that's lovely to hear.
it was so great. And here's what he said that was interesting, because he's a lot younger than me. He wanted to know, how is the brand innovating? Because I love Dr. Martens. However, he's looking at Asics, Adidas, and he's making
Yeah.
choices. And so seeing that you came from those places, and now I understand, now I actually understand why you're working at Dr. Martens, because Dr. Martens to me is a legacy brand in your brain, in your body, in the visuals, from the music, from the Clash to like Pete Townsend, like, punk culture to black culture, like all these different things are wrapped up into the brand, right? But they exist as they were and as they are. So, you have so much, vision and creativity, and I heard it at the talk. What are you actually, what are you bringing to Dr. Martens to actually create change and innovation? You're coming from a place of constant change, because the athletic shoe can change. Dr.
Yeah.
Martens, on the other hand, doesn't feel like it has the flexibility to change.
Oh, that's an interesting point. That's interesting. Um, Look, the brands that I've mentioned are also legacy brands, right? In some cases, some of them are older than Dr. Martens, um, and 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 they're fantastic, iconic brands that will stand the test of time and already have. I think with Dr. Martens, the source of innovation, the source of the brand evolving comes from multiple places. I think the first thing is that the classic boot, the 1460 boot, is 64 years old, and I always talk about how subculture, countercultures, all those things that you just mentioned, punk, goth, grunge, all these different
The
movements are
Clash.
the Clash, all these different bands, do you know what I mean? All of them and all of the movements that were happening within society at the time have all helped propel what was a humble work boot, a true work boot, yeah, and made it stay relevant. So the boot stayed relevant because those around it, the stylized individuals, the culture, the music, the swinging 60s, the 70s, the 80s, all these things have kept it moving forward because it's such a classic, amazing piece of design work that has iconography through the yellow stitch and the kind of interesting details on the sole. And it's iconic. You see a Dr. Martens across the road, you know it's a Dr. Martens. Is a thing that makes it timeless. Now, if you look at brands like an Adidas. Do you know what I mean? And they have the Samba that everyone's wearing at the moment. Yeah. I don't know if you've seen that kind of football-y inspired shoe that everyone's wearing at the moment, all the young ladies are wearing.
I don't think I've seen that one. I mean, my sons, I have three sons and they're shoe obsessed like you are.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
they're not working in shoes. Um, and they have all the brands. It's
If you look
incredible.
at any of these iconic brands that I've mentioned and some of their iconic products that they started with, Um, they're all still relevant in the range. All they do is that they veneer them, they give them new life, they give them new stories, they create new collaborations, they create new projects, they work with new seeding, they work with new partners, they create new marketing campaigns around them to keep them elevated and fresh. And that's what Dot Martens does. We veneer the icon to keep it always relevant, and we manage it in a way that makes it be in the right places at the right time to tell the right stories. Now, that's one way of keeping the boot relevant. We've just launched a new campaign called Reboot, which is really about talking about the lineage of the boot in the 60s and how it's still relevant and inspiring new creation and new constructions and new ways of being and new ways of developing now. And then it ends with a kind of campaign around a new launch of innovation through winterized treatments, right? But it talks about how the boot doesn't need to change that much, but it continues to be, it's a generational thing of its DNA, can be modernized in smart, subtle ways to keep it relevant today. So we do that. And then the other way that we also do it is that we do create new products, or have created new products, which is landing into markets now across the globe through taking the DNA of the brand and pushing it into new spaces. So looking at shoes, looking at sandals, looking at new collaborations with new partners to keep it relevant, to keep the DNA and the energy forward thinking.
So I've noticed when I was at the talk, people had on Doc Martens, and some of them had on colorful ones. Someone had on one that had fabric or something, or felt or something. It was really interesting, and I thought, wow, is that Darren? So what impact have you had on what you're talking about? Because you could have walked in and it was happening, or did you walk in and you started thinking to yourself, how do I extend this brand or come up with brand versions or applications? Like what was the design process to do that? And were you leading that?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think look, there's been many people before me at Dr. Martens. One of my really good friends is the prior creative director, who actually just tried calling me while I was on this call. Um, but there is a creative process that the brand goes through. We have a team of designers and a team of creatives that do a lot of seasonal direction and thinking around application, music, color palette, muses, consumer markets, different ways of wearing, different ways of styling that goes into our creative direction. I work on and present with the team, and we
I
build
want to
out
be a
and we think
muse. I want to be a
you
muse. You
could
said muses. I've
100%
never heard
muses.
anybody say we have muses on our team. That's incredible.
We have muses, we do a lot of research, we do a lot of travel, we go out to the markets, and all of that comes back and is distilled into a creative direction which I will build alongside the team to think about themes and narratives and moments and palettes and materials and insights that we then present to the team and to the business and to the marketing teams and all the rest of the group, and inspire them on the direction of what we're going to create from a product perspective. So that will be taking the classic boot and doing new materials, new treatments based on, I don't know, call it, how do you reinterpret alternative? How do you reinterpret grunge? How do you reinterpret goth? What is the new orange for the season, or what is it? Whatever that would be, we do the research based on travel, insight, thrifting, all this good stuff to use as a baseline to create a foundation for a story. Yeah, be it in autumn, be it in summer, and then we build a palette and we build the frameworks, and then we create within those frameworks. And then we also look at innovation and new ways of constructing and being inspired by our archive and looking back at what we had in the 70s and the 80s that we no longer have in the range, and take that as a point of reference because we think it's on trend and there's going to be an opportunity to build something into it. We look at things that are happening in society, i.e., we've seen recently there's been a movement towards Western music and culture with the whole Taylor Swift movement. The team were already thinking about that 18 months ago. Do you know what I mean? Because they're culturally connected. And then they take that and say, okay, let's think about this. How do we give this kind of a gothic narrative, but then give an American twist to it so that it can talk to our American audience? These are the things that we think about consistently to build stories and narratives from, that then help take the canvas of that boot or the classic shoes and refresh them. And then, as I've said before, we also think about what R&D is, research and development on new construction. So is there an opportunity to look at the brand's archive and pull something out and then rethink and work with our factories and our vendors and our creative teams and our designers on creating new sandal constructions or new boot constructions, higher, lower, lightweight, new compounds, all these different things. So it's not just the classic boot. We have many different levers that we utilize to create stories. And that's not even taken into consideration when we do collaborations with our amazing partners.
All right. Well, first of all, are you sure you're just a creative director? Like, I mean, honestly, that's like literally, it goes back to one of my other questions. So you're at Dr. Martens. Your title is creative director. You don't sound to me like a creative director. Number one. Number two, you're very humble because you keep saying we as opposed to I. So I have questions in that. One, are you just like, you're a creative director. Do you think that what you just described is what a normal creative director in other companies does? Number two, you seem to have found a way, and maybe this is just the way you are because of your upbringing that you brought up earlier. You seem very humble and very behind the scenes. You do not seem to have an ego intertwined in this. I didn't hear you not once say, I was one of the people, or I was the person that encouraged leading this transformation, this design process transformation, to try to bring innovation to the shoe. So I know that's a lot what I just said, but are you keeping up with that?
Well, so let me answer the second question, and then we'll go back to the first. You have to remember the first one. I think there's an element of me that comes from my upbringing, but also people that I've worked with in the industry that I admire quite significantly. And there is no I in team, but there's multiple in individual brilliance. And look, I'm only as good as the team around me. And my thing is to, as a creative lead and as a leader of the company, is to not be the master of one thing, but the jack of all things, right? And have a team of people with me and around me that can do things better than I can do. But my job is to make sure that I can work with these individuals and identify talent and identify people that can elevate stories and do things and design and bring and build and tell stories and create, and make sure we're going in the right direction for the good of the brand. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So that's my job as a creative lead, is to inspire creativity and give the freedom for people to create, to make sure we're going on the right journey, but we're going on as a team. My job, when I say I, is probably when it gets to a point where we can't get to a decision, and then I will make the final call on certain things. But I try to empower the team or the teams and the team to do what they do best. And for me, it's about unlocking individual brilliance within the group, within the team, than more so me standing there saying I did all this, because my job really is to inspire.
I love it. So I'm not even going to ask you what your real title is. I think you answered it. You're like the inspiration leader. I love this. I really enjoy this aspect because I feel like there's so much ego in this business, and there's so many people that want to be in the limelight. They want to be in the front. They always want to be the ones that people think have created all the genius and all the things. And even though you probably are still being very humble in terms of what you're bringing to, Dr. Martens, I know that the people around you appreciate this. I can only imagine when you started there. I imagine that you started from a place of trust, number one. Okay. People trusted you. They believed you. There was no questions about who you are, what your credentials are. So that's a major, massive thing that you walk in with, that you can actually get something done. I also imagine, because it is a legacy brand, you probably had to do a lot of networking and work just to sort of help people see your vision. And I know that's a whole nother conversation. I do want to talk about that if I can one day, but I want to kind of go to another place within, just in general, in the design world we're in. So I'm going to start off by asking you, are you a creative that happens to be Black, or are you a Black creative?
Mm. I am a Black creative.
Okay.
I'm a Black creative. Um, and I've grown into the role. Do you know what I mean? I've had to surround myself with people that I can learn from, to develop. Have I had moments of being feeling like I can't do this, or should I do this in my own head? Yes, but I've had great people around me that saying that you need to be doing this. You need to be pushing and doing more, and you need to be challenging and thinking different and expanding and creating networks and meeting great people and putting yourself out there, because um, there's an element of there's an element of imposter syndrome at times, right? In some of these big organization and brands where you feel, I'm a Black guy, should I be in this position, or a Black female, whatever that would be. And you think, can I really do it? And I've had great people around me, Black and white, um, that have been there to support me and say, do you know what? Go for it. Go for it. Go for it. Just challenge everything that you say makes sense. And they've been backing me and supporting me. So I am a Black creative.
I love that. And I feel like, there's, I guess I really am curious to you, because you've been all over the world. You've been to different countries, and you're also from a family. It sounds like immigrants, right? Like you're from I mean, would you call that? I mean, in the United
Yeah, of
States,
course.
that's what we would say.
Yeah, of
Um,
course.
what do you? Because so you're a Black creative. Do you see do you see differences between Black creatives in America and Black creatives in, just to say in England? I mean, I don't want to say all over the world, but by comparison, because you're in a high level, high design space with people like Pharrell Williams. Okay. Um,
I don't
um,
know about that, but yeah.
you don't know about that. I do, but you know, uh, you know, rest in peace, Virgil Abloh, right? I mean, you're in a, and then there's so many more um, Black men coming into the creative space. I feel like many of them are Black American men,
Yeah, yeah.
right? So, do you feel a solidarity? Do you feel a difference? Do you feel and I know in the United States we always talk about crabs in a barrel. There's only a few of us that can get through and get up. I hate that. I mean, all of us hate it, but it's there. How do you feel about yourself and you being a Black creative in context with other Black creatives all over the world? And how also do you feel about the idea that we're either collaborating together or we're going to try to jockey for the best position? I mean, understanding that you're working for a brand and you have to get the sale. Like, you know what I mean? Like, ultimately, you're trying to sell a million shoes. Like McDonald's, no matter what, they're going to crush the competition. If there's a hamburger shop next door to them, they're going to crush that competition because they got to sell their burger first. I get that, but you're a Black creative.
Mm, an amazing question. Look, first of all, um, Virgil was a collaborator and a friend of myself. We worked together at Dr. Martens many years ago. He's a genius, different level in terms of how he operated and what he did. And he was actually the one that brought and elevated a lot of Black creatives across the globe with his thinking and how he operated and how he opened the doors for many other people. So absolute genius. Can't have to say anything about Virgil apart from just amazing things. Um, I think with the job that I've had and the people that I've worked with, be it good friend Tremaine over at Denim Tears, Samuel Ross, another UK creative that used to work with Virgil and is part of the network, individual called Fode, who has a brand called Labrum in the UK. We're all trying to back each other and support each other more than anything, if I'm being brutally honest. I don't know about jockeying from my perspective or anyone that I know, but I think in the network and the community that I work with, everyone backs each other. Do you know what I mean? When I got the job at Doc Martens, some of the names that I just mentioned before sent me messages, gave me calls, all super proud, all backing each other, all like, dude, this is amazing, congratulations, which for me is just humbling. Do you know what I mean? Coming from people that you admire and that are friends, do you know what I mean? More so than anything. I think that's beautiful. And my role, and since things have been going in a beautiful way with Doc Martens and all these other things, I've had loads of young black creatives that may not be on the same level as what Virgil was or Pharrell and all these wonderful people are reaching out to me. Now I feel it's my duty to not ignore that text message or that Instagram message and hit back. If someone hits me and says, dude, I've got a little project. What do you think? How do you think? Do you know, some people would ignore that. Do you know what I mean? Across any race or gender or whatever that would be. But my thing now is that I wasn't in that position 10 years ago, 20 years ago. So why don't I just pick up the phone and take the call and take it? If someone wants to speak to me, let's find 30 minutes in a day or 5 minutes to send a message to empower other people to try and elevate and help them get up. Does that make sense?
Absolutely,
Um,
totally makes sense.
so,
Yeah.
so for me, that's super important, right? And it goes back to this whole thing that I talk about the sports analogy and why you use the thing, you don't talk about I, you use we. Because in sports and in teams, yeah, I mean, you all work together for the greater good, right? So the greater good for me is that having 12 of the amazing, creative black people around me, be it male, female, whatever that would be, we should all work together as a team to push things forward instead of trying to be the best team, the best player on the team. Do you know what I mean?
Well, the,
Um,
mhm.
that's how I look at it anyway. Maybe it's quite simplistic, but I think it's important.
Yeah, no, it addresses the black solidarity issue, and the challenges that we have around that, and I know that, many successful black people, wherever you come from in the world, you still, have to sell the product. But what you're talking about is really, it's really just about, finding community and having support, because it's very difficult being a black creative in any space and anywhere in the world. There's not many of us. And that goes from whether you're working as a, junior designer somewhere, or whether you make it to the top where you are. We're just not there. We're not there. And I'm really curious. So the people that you mentioned are in the front. You're behind the scenes, which again goes back to the you using we and being relatively humble and crediting people with your success. We have trouble getting into spaces. Okay. So it sounds like you are willing to help other people get there. And I'm kind of, I mean, it do you ever first of all, do you ever get exhausted by this? It doesn't sound like you do. It sounds like you're like, this is like, I'm fortunate. I'm lucky. Look at how far I've come. Look how many people got me here. I'm never going to stop trying to help anybody else. Of course, I'm putting words in your mouth. So, but generally speaking, the doors are really locked, Darren. The doors are locked to us. They're just, we keep being told there's opportunity for you here and there's possibilities there, and you're learning, and let's get you a mentor, and blah blah blah. It's like, okay, I don't need a mentor anymore. I need someone to open the door, and I'm frank, if I kick it down, is there going to be a chair? And if there isn't a chair, let me bring one. Like, I get tired of all this, right? So like, do you have specific things that you're doing? I know at the talk that I was at in New York, you mentioned a nonprofit organization. Like, what are you actually really doing tactically to help black creatives, black youth that have a vision that might need a little extra to get somewhere, right? Like, what are you actually doing?
But one of the main things that I've been doing, or we've been doing with the business is trying to do more in community in general in London and in and around certain key cities with design schools. Namely, I don't know if you've heard of Central St. Martins as an example
Oh,
in the UK,
yeah.
which is one
Would
of
you
the most
would you say that?
esteemed.
Say that again. What is it so people can
Central
hear
St.
that?
Martins, Central St.
Central.
Martins, St. Martins, yeah. So some of the UK's greatest designers have come through that school. Do you know what I mean? And working with organizations and teams within that sphere for me is a way that the brand can actually give back. We have an apprentice scheme within the organization, which have been involved in and support with the business to look at how we get different people, all different backgrounds and different ages into the organization, and try to amplify creativity through that lens, right? So for me, yes, it's great being at the front and it's great having certain aspects of visibility, but there's also, I think it goes back to this whole thing about team play, right? I just come from a place where um, I've been exceptionally lucky to get to where I've got to. Um, I don't always necessarily need to be in the front. To be in an organization like Docs or any other big company that I've had the pleasure of working with, being at the back and having the opportunity to open doors for people. So if someone comes to me as an intern and say, I want to do an internship, or I see a great CV and I open it up and I speak to the person, I can give them a role and a job in that company and they can progress in the company. For me, that's as important as being at the front, if that makes sense. Um, because you never know what that person will end up in 2 or 3 or 10 years, and they could be the next creative director of Celine or the next design director of these companies, of which then you might have the opportunity to go and work with for them. Do you know what I mean? So for me, I look at it from that side. I'd rather lead from the back than necessarily be at the front, because sometimes at the front and this is what I mean by what some of our creative leaders in the last 5 to 10 years have done is they've broken down the doors already. And do you know what I mean? And the door's semi-open, and some of them have locked. Some of them have closed, but the lock it hasn't been locked. I'm just trying to get back to some of those doors and opening them and letting some of the people through the lens of having the opportunity with a brand like Dr. Martens to allow other people through, if that makes sense, right? I don't necessarily need to breaking down all the doors because most of the doors have already been opened. It's more for me to let people see they've got an opportunity to hold on to and work with or alongside myself, Dr. Martens, or whoever else that could be in the future, to allow them the opportunity to express themselves.
Were you the person that created Central States Dr. Martens? Was that one of your
Central State Martens
initiatives?
Club, the project,
Yeah, was that you?
is myself and one of our PR agencies and some of our marketing members, that were thinking about how we can kind of maximize and work with Central St. Martin's on a project to amplify. So I was on the judging panel. There's a lot of work that went into it. We built it all up. We nominated and worked along many different students in the school. We selected some winners, and then we helped elevate those winners through the lens. One of those individuals actually is a guy called Tracy Lynn Pratt, who's of Bayesian descent, and he's currently just got a job now with the ex-creative director of Celine, Phoebe Philo. So he's someone that's come through the program. We've been able to help him work alongside. He did his MA. We supported him. We backed him. He created his own collaboration with Doc Martens. He's done phenomenally well and extremely creative. But he's got a load of young kids that are behind him now. And like, how did you get there? And he's like, do you know what? Doc Martens helped me. And oh yeah, I worked with Darren and some other people. And it's great. So it's kind of, it's not about the one, it's about the many. Do you know what I mean? And for me, it's kind of how do I make sure that someone like Tracy Lane is doing the same thing for his network, and then if I work with somebody else, they're doing the same thing for their network. It's kind of it's a new version of the mentor to a certain extent, and that's not me being overly unhumble, but it's you know what I mean. It's kind of thinking slightly different about inspiration. If I open the door, you open the door for them. Do you know what I mean? It's a
So,
give back.
are you with your role at Dr. Martens or anywhere that you've been or about to go, in the, now in the future, whatever your whole career, do you lead by example, or do you also internally at a company actually have training, training and conversations? Like, we need to have a meeting to talk about this. We need to have a gathering of the people. Let's coordinate with all the people making decisions. Like, what? How do you talk about this? Because a lot of, like, in the United States, diversity, equity, inclusion, and conversations related is under attack, right? And so a lot of Black leaders within companies, whether it's culture or corporate or finance, whatever it is, the conversation, it's a struggle. So, and sometimes to me, you are given an opportunity and a role to lead by example visually, but there are people that are in the back room that don't have that sort of more public facing opportunity. So how are you talking about this or leading or getting people to change?
Yeah, no. I mean, as recent as 2 or 3 weeks ago, I was involved in Black History Month, UK Black History Month, supporting the business and the DE and I team around conversations. And one of the conversations we actually had was with Tracy Pratt and with Fode from Labrum, and thinking about talk about creativity and how they got into their roles and how we can inspire the business to think different. So you got to think Dr. Martens. I talk about Dr. Martens because it is a really unique brand in the fact that it talks to many different demographics and many different people, and it's one of the most fantastic brands for a canvas of expression and allowing people to take the brand in their own way, be it whatever creed you are and wherever you're from or whatever it is. That's the thing that makes it so special. And these conversations are always live within the business in terms of how can we better people, how can we support people, how can we empower people. Our leader of the DE&I team is a fantastic black lady, do you know what I mean? That's driving and pushing the narrative through.
What's her name?
Our chief, Camilla, um, our chief brand officer, who will be moving into the CEO role in January, is a black leader, ex-Apple. He's pushing the narrative and pushing the conversation. So senior people in the business, they're senior people that are representing different backgrounds within the organization. And um, it's just ingrained in the business. It's nothing new. And the business is one of these.
I love that.
You say I'm humble, but Dr. Martens is really humble. I said about the humble work group, right? It's a humble brand because it's a brand and a business for everyone. It doesn't discriminate. It doesn't always need to talk about it. It's doing it, if that makes sense.
Hmm.
And that's what makes it
Absolutely.
special. That's what makes it special. So I think there's a responsibility of the business in the long term, absolutely, to continue to do this and to continue to empower and drive change in the market, but do it in a really effective way that really cuts through instead of standing there shouting and going back to this I, me, and us. This look what we're doing. Actually, we're actually doing stuff, and I think we're starting on that journey right now as a business to really kind of build that muscle. And I think it's going to be really exciting to see where it goes.
Well, we have a little bit of time left, but I have to shout out the two women at the Dr. Martens shop that I visited on the north side of Chicago. And I have to tell you that when I walked in, first of all, and I love the athletic shoe world. I mean, don't get me wrong, but when I walk into a Nike store or a New Balance store or any type of, gym shoe store, athletic shoe store, there's security everywhere and I don't feel comfortable. I feel like I'm being followed and watched and there's cameras. However, Dr. Martens on the north side walked in, and I'm going to tell you, it reminded me of the old fashioned shoe experience where you walk in the store, you're greeted, they're smiling at you, and they're welcoming, have a seat, everybody's warm and friendly, and they ask you for help, and they look at your foot and they talk about the shoe and they talk about the history, breaking things. I mean, it's just like, and then they get the shoe and they bring it out and they have the shoes on themselves and they're just talking about the relationship with the shoe, and it just feels like what you're describing, right? It's like this it's like a handmade personalized experience. And I think what you're talking about and the way you're presenting is exactly the feeling when I walked in that store, when I bought my very first pair. I'm embarrassed to say my very first pair of Dr. Martens shoes. And I think you're right. There's no way you can take what you have and get it to the store unless it was real.
100%. And I think it's real people doing real things, right? I think the people that we employ in the stores, the people that we employ in the office, the people that employ in the design team, we spend a lot of time thinking about making sure we get the right people, right? And what I mean by that, passionate people that care about things. And what I mean by things, I mean culture, other people. Do you know what I mean? They're into stuff. This isn't just a job, it's more than a job. Do you know what I mean? They generally love the brand. They generally love who they are and what they stand for in their communities and with their people. They have a passion and a connection to all things authentic, do you know what I mean, and true, and they're their true self. Because if you can't turn up to work and be your true self, then who can you be? And I think that's what my experience of being at Dr. Martens and working with the people that had to work with, old and new, are just true, fantastic people. Do you know what I mean? That are all encompassing of change and thinking different and thinking outside the box. And that's what makes it a wonderful place to be and a wonderful place to have been. And it's 10 years of being there and it's been amazing and it's been a great journey. And I'm excited for what's going to happen for the business and for the brand and myself and all these different things. But I'm more excited for the people that will take this brand on to the next generation. Do you know what I mean? And we've had a conversation about other things that are happening around the world right now, and there's lots of worry and lots of um, um, let's say yeah, worry. I think the great thing about Doc Martens is that it transcends a lot of that noise and nonsense. And as long as we as leaders and people in the business continue to think positively about the way forward, then things will be all right.
I love it. And when I was in the shop, I have to tell you, because Doc Martens is so affiliated and associated with music, right? And you love
Yeah,
music. I was looking at all the different types of music and fashion associated with Dr. Martens all over the internet, and I do think wearing Doc Martens is a statement. I mean, I wore my Doc Martens with my long, you know, black tie gown at an event,
sick.
and oh, totally, it was great. I've always associated with a little bit of rebellism, which I have in my soul, and I'm also an inclusive woman, an inclusive person. I'm multi hyphenate, and it actually says something about me when I wear those. And sometimes it is like a throw in the face of someone who doesn't necessarily accept all different types of people looking different ways, and I love that. I love seeing people
100%.
shocked. I love seeing people shocked faces. They're like, wow, she must be different. I'm like, yes, and it's fine. So I want to just, ask you, just like a future question. You're so successful. You're a high profile, highly respected, incredibly creative, black man leader in the design space.
Thank you. Thank you.
Um, and I believe you're taking care of yourself. I hope you're taking care of yourself. How are you thinking about your impact in the future? Like, what do you want? What do you want to be doing? I mean, with your vision and your ability to even like connect supply chain with design.
Yeah, no, no, I hear you. Look, wow, that's a huge question, and I don't know if I could answer it fully, but um, first of all, thank you for your kind words. There's multiple, there's still a lot more to be done, right? There's still a lot more to be done in general in many different things. We know that. A lot more that can be done in the brand that I'm with, or potentially future brands that I may go and work with, or other organizations that I may go and work with. I think from the sentiment of what I've been trying to say with in my upbringing within the industry and in my private life is I've got to hand this off at some point. Do you know what I mean? I've got to enjoy the success and some of the things that I've been through, and hopefully some more will come down the line. But I've got to get to a point where I can hand it off to my children. Do you know what I mean? And give them something to think about and develop and build into. But alongside that, also start to work with more people in the industry to try and educate, teach, learn that not everything needs to be, you need to go to art school to be a creative director. You don't necessarily need to be, I don't know, extremely educated to do this role. Actually, it's about application, how you think, how you operate. And we talked about design thinking and how you think about solutions. My my being and the way that I want to be is how I've been brought up is to put yourself in situations that make you feel uncomfortable and get comfortable with them and start to design, think your way around how you're going to grow. Does that make sense? And teach people and try and educate people on there's unconventional routes to get to where you need to get to. You don't need to stop and feel that you're being hard done to or this is an issue because a door was closed. Actually, how do you open the door and get around the door? Do you know what I mean? How do you find another way into the building? And that um, thinking and ingenuity or whatever word you want to use is what I want to kind of distill and bottle up and then hopefully somehow pass that on to my kids, my three young ladies that are my daughters that are growing up. And then also to the kids that I'm going to work with, hopefully in the future, and then the kids that I'm working with at the moment too. You know what? Don't worry about it. If you get knocked down, you can get up and go again. Do you know what I mean? I was knocked down. I've been told that I'm not going to get this job or whatever, but I've worked around it. And now I look back and those people see me and they're like, whoa, look at you. So for me, there's opportunity in everything.
I love that. So this has been such a fantastic conversation. I have to have my rapid fire questions and go down the list for you, just a couple.
What's
There's
this?
surprising questions.
Oh,
So my
God.
first question is because you love music. You're from a family of people that love music. Your father was a pianist, and by the way, my oldest son Dexter Birkenbeuel is a classically trained jazz pianist. And at all of his performances, he has the tassel Doc Martens on his feet. They're like
No
there's like
way.
a what do you call that?
Jazz
Isn't it a
shoe,
tassel?
proper jazz shoe. Yeah.
Yeah, he's got
Tassel,
that.
Adrian Tassel. Yeah.
Yeah, he's got it's so great. I love it. And my younger son, my middle son, he actually is a Tim's. He's a Tim's kid.
Okay.
He's a 6'6" volleyball player,
Sick.
Dallas, and yeah, he's also an artist. So I loved your conversation around sports and art. I mean, it's real. It's so real.
It
And
is real.
my
Absolutely.
youngest son's a hockey player, so he's he's into he's the hoodie kid. He's the kid with the hoodies and the shoes. Yeah. But anyway, question for you. So Dr. Martens, what, and this might be hard, what band or musical group would you today associate and say, you know what, that band to me, that's as a Doc Martin, that's a Doc Martin band. You know what I mean? Like what
Yes.
comes to
Oh
your mind?
gosh. What, today's bands or an older band?
And you know
Or
what? I
any
mean,
band?
the older band is, obviously when I think of Doc Martens, I'm thinking of London Calling, not the Clash. I'm thinking of the punk band. I'm blanking right now with Johnny Rotten. Um,
Oh, Sex Pistols.
oh yeah, I'm thinking Sex
Sex
Pistols. But
Pistols.
so
Yeah.
I don't want you to be. I want you to come up with someone that's black, a black band or a black singer or hip hop, anything that's black that you say, you know what, I would love to see a pair of Doc Martens on them.
Do you know the one? I don't know if you've ever heard of this band. You may have heard of it, but I'm sure some of the listeners may have heard of it. One of the bands that was quintessential in the whole movement around and what I'm into, right? And which is not part of the story. It's part of the story, but I didn't tell you the part of the story. My uncle was a black skinhead, right? When I say that, I mean that in terms of the stylized skinhead, not the other one. That means nothing. But my uncle was into ska music and reggae music and listened to a band called the Specials.
Oh yes, of
Yeah,
course, of course. I mean, I have
and
a band. I don't know if
this,
you know that.
yeah, yeah,
I have a country
and
band. I know that. I know the specials. We have their
ah,
records, of course. Yes,
so the Specials were this kind of um, band of black and white people. Do
I
you know what I mean?
love
That
you
wore
so
tassel
much.
shoes, zoot suits. Do you know what I mean? So for me, the Specials would be
My
the
God,
band that I listened to and I heard when I was a kid growing up, and
yes.
it was the one that I associate with Doc Martens for me. Do you know what I mean? As well as the Clash and all the rest of it, because I know them and they're a little bit after the time. If I think about now, and I think about a black musician or someone that whereas the brand embodies some aspect of the rebellious thinking. We've done work with we've had the pleasure of making shoes for Tyler the Creator before. Do you know what I mean? And he wears loafers. So Tyler's won the brand. That's been really
Well,
interesting.
I love him.
Um,
He's got new stuff out.
we got new stuff out, and he's quite, I mean, counterculture, a little bit kind of left of the norm,
Yeah,
skate culture.
Eraserhead.
So
His new thing is
yeah,
Eraserhead.
exactly.
Looks like
Do you know what I mean?
Eraserhead.
So you
Totally.
think about these people from a UK point of view and a US point of view. Those two kind of really interesting points of reference.
Anybody underground that and from the UK that you'd want to shout out about with that you would like to associate with the brand, or is that just too hard?
Oh God, no, there's loads of people. I think it's too hard because there's so many people. But gosh, there's like, have you heard of Yves Tumor? Yves Tumor is in the that more rock punk orientated um, creative from
Okay.
in and around New York. He's probably one. Yeah, there's loads of people. There's too many people.
I love it, but I love you came up with one. Okay, so if you were going to name a sub brand for Dr. Martens, what would you call it?
Oh gosh, I wouldn't do that because I get done for IP infringement. A sub, a sub, a, s- um, a
This isn't
sub
real. This
brand.
isn't real. I mean, like
Yeah, yeah, no, no,
I
no, no,
asked,
no. I hear you. I hear you. A sub brand. You just call it Docs. Like it's
really?
kind of like, or what were you calling it? You're saying Doc Martens.
Oh, I was saying doc, like
Um,
as in doc, like what up, doc? What's up, doc? Like DOC. Like literally,
ah,
my head was doc. I never ever called it Dr. Martens. It's just for me, it's Dr. Martens is
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Dr. Martens.
A sub brand for Doc Martens. Wow, that's interesting. I mean, I don't know. I struggle to kind of think about a sub brand because there are so many hyphenated different versions of the brand itself. Do you know what I mean? Docs or Dr. Martens, or some people call it Martins. Do you know what I mean? It's tough for me to nail on one because you could use any of those as a sub brand if you want. Do you know what I mean? Docs by Doc Martens or something like this. Do you know what I mean?
I love it.
You could
I
come
love
up.
it.
Does that make sense?
It totally makes sense. I've got one more question. So, um, where or what do you keep returning to over and over again for creative inspiration? Like, and let me predicate that by saying,
Beautiful question.
but wait, let me just predicate that. And I feel like, should I predicate it or not? Like when I met you, one of the things that you said was the first thing I look at when I look at people is not their faces. I look at their feet. And they're like, I look at their shoes and the shoes, what someone's wearing tells me a lot about their personality. And I'm like, I don't want to lead you and say, is that it? Or tell me what you would have said if I hadn't said that.
What an amazing question that is. Well, I probably would have said that, but it goes back to what you said earlier. When you went to our store, or when you said you put a pair of boots on, and people can identify some aspects of your characteristics. My weird, let's say, guilty pleasure is spending time traveling the world in different cities, people watching, um, because it's the best way, and the creatives are like that I work with and that I've worked with, to just get a sense of style and how people are dressing and what I wonder what they're doing tonight or what they're. Do you know what I mean? I wonder where she's going dressed in that beautiful dress and a pair of loafers. I wonder what he's doing wearing that Nirvana t-shirt and a pair of ripped jeans and a pair of 1460 boots that look like they haven't been cleaned in 30 years. Like, do you know what I mean? These things are really great points of inspiration. First and foremost. The second thing
I love that.
is the second thing is the archive. So we have an archive in Camden that is full of shoes from the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s, early 2010s, stuff I've never seen before, samples that we made that never went to market. There's things in there that are really unique, half-made shoes, different soles, all these different things that generations before me worked on. And we've got this amazing archivist and amazing legal team that spend a lot of time scouring the world as we travel. And using those two areas are the things that I always start with. Because the great thing about Docs is that because it's a timeless design, you don't necessarily need to look at all the other stuff that's going out in the market because it's the people that wear it and style it that make it cool. Do you know what I mean? That's the reason why the boot has kind of kept itself and it's those around it make it cool. But then knowing that you've created product off that and you've got it in the archive and you can look back and, oh, that's a really cool little detail on that shoe. How do we bring that back and make that a bigger thing? Do you know what I mean? Oh, no one's ever thought about that. It's kind of these little areas of theory that we work within and that I find the most exhilarating to kind of use as points of reference.
You know, I want to go. Is that like a secret vault, kind of like the recipe for Coca-Cola? Like nobody can go unless you sign like, you know what I mean? Is it like
Nobody
that?
can, yeah, it's kind of like that. Yeah, no,
Oh,
money joke's
darn
not
it.
really. I mean,
Darn.
anyone, anyone that wants to come through and visit the archive, and we also still have a factory in the UK as well, where we make our Made in England collection that have people that have worked there for 40 years or 30 years that remember how the first pairs were ever made. They're the sources of inspiration because they're the ones that retain certain elements of knowledge that you would never get from, do you know what I mean? A trend book. I don't believe in trends. We create trends. I mean, I don't follow them. Does that make sense? And we
Yeah, I
kind of,
mean,
do you know what I mean?
it totally makes sense. Do you have recordings of their stories? I mean, does anybody working on that?
Yeah,
It's
well,
kind of like when you
yeah, yeah.
is there someone, I mean, it's like people that go and make sure they record the language that's never been spoken by anybody ever again. And it's like there's one person left that speaks that language. Does somebody doing that for Dr. Martens with these people?
Well, there's an element of um, retention of information. Do you know what I mean? We're doing something around trying to collate and work with the ones that worked here in the 90s and reach back out. And there's designers that were in the business that are quite old and we brought them in and they've got boxes in their garages full of stuff that we even didn't know existed. And
That is
we reach out and
crazy.
we try to document it all.
That's like the Chopin song that they found, the piece that they found in that. Did you hear about that?
No.
The undiscovered piano piece by Chopin. They
Oh yeah,
literally pulled. Yeah, it's like
dude, yeah.
you're just like, where did this come from? And then like there was an Instagram story recently, and it was connected to Hermes. Is that how you pronounce Hermes? Is it Hermes brand?
Yeah, 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 yeah.
Where they went to this old shop in New York that makes those handmade flowers. The flowers. I don't know I don't know what you call them in the fashion world, but they actually have handmade flowers. And they went to the shop and they show these people with these like older hands pulling together these flowers. And I think one of the things that I love about what you're saying, this is the last thing I'm going to say, is that I love that we're now having access to information through these, social media tools, that we can go and show people some of the beautiful things that have happened and been created, and they're not going to be lost. They're not going to be lost, like you telling me that they're finding ways to record people that have been with the brand forever. It means something, because I almost feel like there's so much information, there's so much out there now, and there's so many tools and ways to get it. We're consuming so much, but sometimes I'm like, we're not consuming the right things. Why don't we need to learn more about these people from the establishment of brands like, Dr. Martens, and say, please show me that you have a box where that has what in it, and you did this when, at what time, and you created this thing that now shows up on a shoe, 50 years later, that we didn't even know where it actually came. Like, I just love knowing those old stories, because that's, to your point, that inspires me. That makes me feel like there's hope in humanity, like we're going to keep moving forward, and we're going to keep creating, and we're going to keep making art, and we're going to keep seeing beautiful things. No matter what's happening around us, beauty is still going to be created. And I just really love that you ended with that, because it's really needed.
100%. I'll surround that with something else. It goes back to what we were saying before about surrounding yourself with people that are better than you, but also surrounding yourself with people that can enrich your knowledge. So one of the things that I'm obsessed with elders. I love my elders. Do you know what I mean? I love to sit with my
I should show you.
grandparents.
I'm obsessed with Elvis. You don't know. I feel like.
I said elders.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you said Elvis.
I said elders. And what I mean by that,
I'm an Elvis obsessed too, but go ahead.
what I mean by that, there's people that have worked at Doc Martens for many years, that were there at these seminal moments of creation, or certain things being built, and certain stories and narratives, of which for me I obsess over. No different to when you talk about, you sit with your grandma or your grandfather, and he tells you about this really interesting story about your cousin or your uncle before you were even born, and you're like, oh, that's how they got to do what they're going to do. Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
If you don't understand where you come from, how the hell do you know where you're going to go? Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So for me, it's the same thing with a brand. If the people in the business don't have the mindset to think about, let me study what's going on here, let me study how that happened and where they got to, how can you build anything that's going to have stability for the future, because you're building it on no knowledge? Does that make sense? So for me, I always talk to the creative team about, the answers are in the archive. Speak to that person. Do you know what I mean? Reach out to this person, because they'll tell you how it was done and when it was done. And then you take what you take from that and use that knowledge to improve or better it, or redo it. That's simple as it is. Do you know what I mean? You've got a family recipe. It's the most amazing meal. You're passing it down through generations, like you're passing the boot down through generations. It should taste the same, but have a little tweak. That's how I think about things.
I love it. Well, this conversation has been totally fantastic, as I knew it would be. You're so interesting, and there's so many other questions I have for you, but we don't have enough time. I'm going to have an offline conversation with you, because I want to learn more about the music you love, because I can tell that you love really cool stuff. So everybody, thank you so much for coming to my show, the Honest Field Guide podcast, and having this just vibrant conversation with the creative director of Dr. Martens, Darren McKoy. You can follow Darren on Instagram. His Instagram is D as in Darren _DOT _McKoy MCKOY. And you can also conduct a search for Darren McKoy on any search engine. And I want to thank you again for joining me on the Honest Field Guide podcast. Thank you, Darren.
Thank you, JinJa, for having me. It's been brilliant, and you've challenged me.
All right, we'll see everybody next time. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
The Honest Field Guide is produced by the team at Burke Creative, where brand and multi-channel strategies are designed to help you get attention, grow, scale, and keep up with the pace of change. The music on the podcast is written and performed by Utah Carol. You can find their songs everywhere online to buy or stream. The opinions expressed on the Honest Field Guide are solely those of the hosts and guests.